In the theater of emotional conflict, one pattern is universally observed, and yet perpetually misunderstood: the boomerang effect. You terminate a destructive relationship. You cut the cord, you secure your exit, only to watch the toxic individual inevitably reemerge, attempting to breach your psychological perimeter and reignite the cycle of chaos. This pattern is not an accident of fate. It is a predictable strategic consequence of their pathology and your vulnerability. They return not out of love or change, but out of necessity. Today, we are dissecting the three core psychological forces that compel toxic people to always return. And more importantly, we are providing the definitive, non-negotiable strategy required to permanently end the cycle. The primary reason toxic individuals, particularly narcissists, manipulators, and sociopaths, return is rooted in a chemical, unyielding necessity, which is the first core reason: the necessity of supply, or the addiction to your emotional energy. They view other people not as individuals, but as sources of fuel or supply required to maintain their fragile, externalized ego structure. This fuel can be positive, such as praise, admiration, or validation, or it can be negative, such as fear, rage, pleading, or despair. When you successfully leave the relationship, you do not just reject them, you initiate an emotional famine in their life. Their return is not a sign of remorse. It is a fuel check, executed through what is known as hoovering, a psychological tactic designed to suck you back into the vacuum of their chaos. They may deploy the pity ploy, returning in a state of manufactured crisis, expressing crushing loneliness, profound regret, or even sudden physical illness, all designed to activate your empathy and sense of responsibility. Alternatively, they may use the false future promise, returning and promising a radical, permanent change, such as claiming they've been to therapy or finally understand everything, thereby leveraging your greatest hopes against your current resolve. They return because their new sources of supply are either insufficient, inferior, or have failed entirely. And they know with cold certainty that you are a proven, high-quality, high-yield source of supply. The connection is already built, the vulnerabilities are already mapped, and the resistance is already worn down. They return to extract the energy needed to stabilize their fractured ego, and their true need is not for you. Their need is for the chaos you allow them to create. The second core driver for their return is their pathological inability to tolerate a loss of control, which we identify as the preservation of territory. For the toxic personality, the relationship is not a partnership, it is territory, and your departure, even if executed quietly, is perceived as a direct, aggressive challenge to their perceived authority and their right to ownership. Your life, your emotional state, and your future success are viewed as assets. They have a fundamental right to manage. And when you leave, they experience what is known as narcissistic injury, which is the ego's violent reaction to being exposed, challenged, or rejected. Their return is therefore a territorial reclamation, with the objective of simply reestablishing control by proving that they can access you, destabilize you, or manipulate you back into a subservient state whenever they choose. They return to audit your defenses, testing the strength of your boundaries, your resolve, and the effectiveness of your support network, and to devalue your progress. If they see you happy, successful, or content without them, they must immediately deploy devaluation tactics to undermine your progress, ensuring your growth does not expose their inadequacy. They view you as an extension of themselves, and to leave them is to sever a limb, forcing them to fight to reattach it, not out of affection, but to regain the functional integrity of their own delusional world, maintaining the illusion that they are the primary source of meaning and chaos in your life. The third reason toxic people always return is tied to their rigid, destructive self-concept, which is the reinforcement of the identity. The toxic individual, especially those with predatory tendencies, requires a defined role as the dominant actor in their narrative and needs a stable, predictable antagonist against whom they can define their own perceived superiority. You are that antagonist, and if you are a former victim, your return allows them to confirm their power. If you are a former challenge, your return allows them to prove their victory, as they need your presence in their life to act as a psychological mirror that only reflects their perceived strength. When they leave you alone, they lose their favorite, most essential scene partner and must find new people and invest new energy to establish the same dysfunctional dynamic, making returning to you the psychological path of least resistance. It allows them to step back into a fully developed narrative where their victim role is confirmed. If they return in crisis, you must validate their suffering, and their power is instant, as they know exactly which emotional buttons trigger your compliance, fear, or protective instinct. They return to confirm their own identity as the powerful, necessary, or aggrieved figure in the drama. And your compliance validates their existence, while your rejection challenges their entire framework. The cycle ends the moment you cease being a source of supply and begin being a source of consequence. And ending the boomerang effect requires not just distance, but an absolute permanent re-engineering of your perimeter. The only response to the return of a toxic individual is the instant, non-negotiable implementation of the steel barrier, a permanent, complete detachment known as the no-contact rule, which is not a timeout. It is the absolute termination of all communication channels. You must implement zero access by blocking them on every single platform, email, and phone number. And you must avoid notifying them, as the act of notification provides them with a final burst of negative supply. You must ensure zero information by instructing any mutual friends, family, or colleagues that you will no longer tolerate receiving updates about the toxic person or sharing information about your life with them, ensuring the channel of information is completely severed. Crucially, you must maintain zero exception, understanding that the greatest failure point is the belief that just one text or just one conversation will provide closure, as closure is an internal process you grant yourself, not a gift the manipulator will ever provide. And any contact, no matter how brief or necessary it feels, restarts the supply line. Once the external barrier is established, you must eliminate the internal vulnerabilities that allowed the connection in the first place, which is the internal re-engineering. You must identify the weakness, the primary mechanism they used to control you, whether it was your fear of being alone, your need for their validation, or your excessive empathy, as this is the hook they use to reel you back in. You must then weaponize indifference by actively cultivating emotional indifference toward their existence, treating any memory of them like a faded commercial jingle. Acknowledge its presence, but refuse to engage with its emotional weight. Ensuring their non-existence in your life becomes the new baseline of peace. Finally, you must create external accountability by sharing your story and your successful exit with trusted people who will hold you accountable, as making your commitment public creates a powerful social deterrent against violation, raising the stakes of your potential failure. The toxic person always returns because they have been trained to succeed at it, but the cycle ends when you successfully train them through absolute, unwavering no contact, that the cost of trying to breach your perimeter is now infinitely greater than the potential reward of your supply, forcing them to finally permanently pivot toward an easier target.